The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of London as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his iconic red uniform one final time. At 34 years old, he had served as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace for nearly 8 years. But today felt different. Something in the air made him more alert than usual. James had always taken his duty seriously. Growing up in a small town in Yorkshire, he never imagined he would one day stand guard at the most famous palace in the world. His father had been a police officer and his grandfather served in World War II. Service ran in his blood, and protecting the royal family wasn't just a job. It was an honor he carried with deep pride. The palace grounds were bustling with the usual morning activity. Tourists gathered behind the iron gates, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Tour guides spoke in multiple languages, pointing out architectural details and sharing historical facts. Children pressed their faces against the bars, hoping to catch a glimpse of the guards in their tall black hats. James stood at his assigned post near the main entrance, his rifle held precisely as trained. His eyes constantly scanned the crowd, looking for anything unusual. Years of experience had taught him to notice the smallest details: a person lingering too long, someone avoiding eye contact, or behavior that didn't match the typical tourist. Pattern. As the morning progressed, the crowd grew thicker. Families posed for photos, street performers entertained visitors, and vendors sold souvenirs from nearby stands. The atmosphere was cheerful and relaxed, exactly as it should be on a beautiful spring day in London. Around 11 o'clock, James noticed a small commotion near the corner of the street. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, had separated from what appeared to be a school group. She had blonde, curly hair and wore a bright blue jacket that made her easy to spot among the adults. The child looked confused and frightened, turning in circles as she searched for familiar faces. James felt his protective instincts kick in immediately. While he couldn't abandon his post, he kept a close eye on the situation. The girl's teacher seemed to be looking for her, calling out a name that sounded like Emma or Amy. Other children in matching school uniforms were being gathered together, but this little one remained lost in the crowd. Suddenly, a dark blue van pulled up to the curb near where the girl stood. The vehicle looked ordinary enough, no special markings or anything that would immediately raise suspicion. However, something about the way it positioned itself, almost strategically between the girl and her school group, made James take notice. The van's engine remained running, and through the tinted windows James could make out at least 2 figures in the front seats. The driver appeared to be watching the little girl intently, while a passenger seemed to be speaking on a mobile phone. This behavior struck James as odd. Most vehicles in this area either dropped off passengers quickly or moved along due to traffic restrictions. James shifted his position slightly to get a better view while maintaining his professional stance. His training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every instinct was telling him to pay attention to this situation. The girl was becoming more distressed, and the adults around her seemed too busy with their own concerns to notice her growing panic. The van's passenger door opened, and a middle-aged man stepped out. He was dressed casually in jeans and a dark jacket, nothing that would immediately identify him as suspicious. However, his behavior was what caught James's attention. Instead of looking around normally like a tourist or visitor, the man's focus was entirely on the little girl. James watched as the man began walking toward the child with purpose. The stranger's approach seemed calculated, not like someone simply trying to help a lost child. He moved with confidence, as if he knew exactly what he was doing and had done it before. The little girl, still spinning around looking for her teacher, didn't notice the approaching stranger. She was crying now, her small voice barely audible, over the noise of the crowd. James felt his heart racing as he realized this innocent child might be in real danger. Training and protocol warred with human instinct in James's mind. He was positioned to protect the palace and couldn't simply abandon his post, but he also couldn't ignore what appeared to be a potential threat to a child. The rules were clear about maintaining position, but they were also clear about protecting innocent civilians when possible. The man from the van was now just a few feet away from the girl. James noticed he was reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out what looked like candy or a small toy. This was a classic approach used by predators to gain a child's trust and attention. At that moment, James made his decision. Palace protocol was important, but protecting an innocent child was more important. He had sworn an oath to serve and protect, and that oath extended beyond the palace walls to include every citizen, especially the most vulnerable. James began, moving from his post, his hand instinctively moving toward his rifle. He kept his movements controlled and professional, not wanting to cause panic among the tourists, but he was now fully focused on the developing situation. His years of training kicked in as he assessed the threat level and planned his approach. The stranger was now speaking to the little girl, who looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. James could see her nodding at something the man was saying. Whatever story the stranger was telling, the frightened child was beginning to trust him. This was exactly how these situations typically unfolded, and James knew he had only seconds to act. As James moved closer, he noticed the van's engine revving slightly, and the driver was now also watching the interaction between the man and the child. Everything about the situation screamed danger to his trained eye. The coordination between the man and the driver, the strategic positioning of the vehicle, and the targeted approach to an isolated child all pointed to a planned operation. The little girl reached out and took what the man was offering her. James was now close enough to see it was indeed candy, wrapped in bright-colored paper. The man smiled and gestured toward the van, saying something about helping her find her family. The child's innocent trust was about to put her in terrible danger, and James knew he was possibly her only chance at safety. James quickened his pace, his military training taking over as he approached the unfolding situation. He could see the stranger gently taking the little girl's hand, leading her toward the van with practiced ease. The child, still clutching the candy, looked up at the man with complete trust, having no idea of the danger she might be walking into. "Excuse me, sir," James called out in his commanding voice, still maintaining professional composure but making his presence known. The stranger froze for a moment, then turned around with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. The little girl looked confused, glancing between James in his impressive red uniform and the man who had offered her candy. "Oh, hello there, officer," the stranger said, his voice carrying a slight tremor that James immediately picked up on. "I was just helping this little one find her family. She seemed lost." The explanation sounded rehearsed, too smooth for a genuine Good Samaritan encountering a random situation. James stepped closer, positioning himself between the stranger and the van, while keeping the child in his protective sight. His years of experience had taught him to read people, and everything about this man's body language screamed deception. The way he avoided direct eye contact, the slight sweat on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and the way he kept glancing back at the van all raised red flags. "What's your name, sweetheart?" James asked the little girl, crouching down to her level while keeping his eyes on the stranger. His voice was gentle and reassuring, the same tone he used when speaking to his own nieces and nephews during family gatherings. "Emma," the child replied in a small voice, still holding the candy. "I can't find Miss Johnson or my class. This nice man said he would help me." Her innocence was heartbreaking, and James felt a surge of protective anger toward anyone who would exploit such trust. James noticed the van's driver was becoming agitated, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel and frequently checking his mirrors. The passenger was also on his phone again, speaking in hushed tones. These behaviors confirmed James's suspicions that this was no random act of kindness, but a coordinated effort. "Emma, that's a beautiful name," James said, maintaining his calm demeanor while his mind raced through possible scenarios. "You know what? I think I can help you find Miss Johnson much better than this gentleman can. Royal Guards are really good at finding people." He extended his hand toward the child, offering her a choice between continuing with the stranger or coming with him. The stranger's facade began to crack. "Actually, we were just heading to the van to look for her teacher from there," he said, his voice becoming more insistent. "I told her I saw her class go that way." He pointed in a direction away from where James had actually seen the school. Group gathering. This lie confirmed everything James suspected. He straightened to his full height, his impressive military bearing making him appear even more imposing in his ceremonial uniform. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the child," he said firmly, his hand moving to rest on his rifle. It was a subtle but unmistakable signal that he was prepared to escalate the situation if necessary. The stranger's eyes widened at the sight of James's weapon, and his pretense of being a helpful citizen began to completely dissolve. "Look, there's no need for any of this," he said, taking a step back but still trying to maintain control of the situation. "I was genuinely trying to help. You're making this into something it's not." James had heard these denials countless times during his military service and police training. Predators always claimed innocence when confronted, always had explanations for their behavior. But their actions spoke louder than their words, and this man's actions had been textbook predatory behavior from the moment he stepped out of that van. "Emma," James said, never taking his eyes off the stranger, "I want you to come stand right behind me, okay? We're going to find Miss Johnson together." The little girl looked uncertain, glancing between the two adults. The stranger had offered her candy and promises, while this uniformed guard was asking her to trust him instead. In that moment, Emma made the decision that would likely save her life. Perhaps it was James's official uniform, or the authority in his voice, or simply a child's instinct recognizing genuine protection versus false promises. She walked over to James and stood behind his tall, imposing figure, still clutching the candy, but now seeking safety rather than assistance. The stranger's demeanor changed completely when he realized he had lost control of the situation. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating expression that revealed his true nature. "You're making a mistake, guard," he said, his voice now carrying a threatening undertone. "You don't know what you're interfering with." James felt a chill run down his spine at the man's words. This wasn't just about child abduction anymore. There was something larger at play here. The stranger's confidence, despite being caught, his threatening tone, and the organized nature of the operation, suggested this wasn't the work of a simple predator, but something more sinister. The van's driver had now turned off the engine and was stepping out of the vehicle. He was a larger man, more physically imposing than his partner, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to intimidation and violence. James realized he might be facing not just child abductors, but potentially dangerous criminals involved in something much worse. "Emma, I need you to run toward those other guards over there," James said quietly, pointing to his colleagues at the palace gate. "Tell them that Sergeant Mitchell needs assistance immediately. Can you do that for me?" His voice remained calm, but the urgency was clear. The little girl nodded, her young mind understanding that something serious was happening, even if she couldn't grasp the full danger she had been in. She dropped the candy and ran toward the palace gates as fast as her little legs could carry her, her bright blue jacket making her easy for the other guards to spot. As Emma ran to safety, James found himself facing two men who were clearly prepared for confrontation. The stranger who had first approached the child reached into his jacket again, but this time James could see it wasn't for more candy. The movement was quick and practiced, suggesting he was reaching for something far more dangerous. James's training kicked into high gear. His hand moved to his rifle with the speed and precision that came from years of practice. The situation had escalated from a potential child abduction to an active threat, and he was prepared to respond accordingly. The palace, the tourists, and most importantly, little Emma's safety all depended on his next actions. The two men exchanged glances, communicating without words in the way that experienced criminals often do. They were evaluating their options, weighing the risks of continuing their operation against the complications that had arisen. James stood his ground, every muscle tensed and ready, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether this situation ended peacefully or became something much more dangerous. The tension in the air was thick as James faced the two men, his rifle now firmly in his grasp. In the distance, he could hear Emma's voice calling out to his fellow guards, her words carrying across the courtyard with the urgency only a frightened child could convey. The sound of running footsteps told him that backup was on the way, but he knew these crucial seconds could make all the difference. The stranger who had first approached Emma was no longer pretending to be a good Samaritan. His hand remained inside his jacket, and James could see the outline of what appeared to be a weapon. The man's partner from the van had positioned himself at an angle, clearly trying to flank James and create multiple points of threat. These were not amateurs. Their movements showed tactical awareness and criminal experience. "You should have minded your own business, guard," the first man said, his voice cold and menacing. "This is bigger than you understand, and you've just made a very dangerous enemy." The threat was clear, but James had faced dangerous enemies before during his military service. Fear was not going to determine his actions. Duty and the protection of innocence would. James kept his position steady, his rifle ready but not yet aimed directly at either man. His training taught him to de-escalate when possible, but also to be prepared for immediate action if the situation demanded it. "The only thing I understand is that you were about to take a little girl without permission," he replied firmly. "And that's not going to happen while I'm here." The driver, the larger of the two men, laughed coldly. "You think this was about one little girl? You really don't know what you've stumbled into, do you?" His words sent another chill through James. If this wasn't just a simple abduction attempt, what was it? What had Emma unknowingly walked into that required such elaborate planning? Behind the men, James noticed something that made his blood run cold. The van's rear doors were slightly open, and through the gap, he could see what looked like restraints and other equipment that had no innocent purpose. There were also what appeared to be small personal items, a child's shoe, a colorful hair clip, a small backpack. The implications hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Emma. These men had done this before, possibly many times. The items in the van suggested other children had been victims of whatever operation these criminals were running. James realized he wasn't just protecting one little girl. He was potentially stopping a much larger crime that had likely already harmed other innocent children. The sound of approaching guards grew louder, but the two criminals seemed unconcerned about the reinforcements. If anything, their confidence appeared to increase, which struck James as completely wrong for the situation. Normal criminals would be looking for escape routes, not standing their ground against armed royal guards. With backup arriving, "You know what I think?" the first man said, his hand still concealed in his jacket. "I think you're going to let us get back in our van and drive away, because if you don't, there are going to be consequences that reach far beyond this little confrontation." The threat was vague but carried the weight of something much more sinister than typical criminal bravado. James's mind raced as he tried to understand what he was really facing. The men's confidence, their organized approach, their threatening references to larger consequences, all of it pointed to something beyond a simple child abduction ring. Were they part of an international trafficking operation? Did they have connections to organized crime or even terrorism? The possibilities were chilling. 3 of James's fellow guards arrived at that moment, their weapons drawn and ready. Sergeant Davies, a veteran with 15 years of service, quickly assessed the situation. "What's the status, Mitchell?" he asked, his eyes never leaving the 2 suspects. "2 suspects attempted to abduct a child," James reported quickly. "The girl is safe, but I believe there's evidence of previous crimes in their vehicle. They've been making threats about larger consequences and seem unusually confident for people in their position." The arrival of additional guards should have prompted the criminals to surrender or attempt escape, but instead the first man smiled coldly. "You might want to check your communications," he said to Sergeant Davies. "I think you'll find that your superiors are about to receive some very interesting phone calls." Davies spoke into his radio, requesting an immediate status check from command. The response he received made his face go pale. "There's been a security alert," he said quietly to James. "Multiple agencies are reporting coordinated threats across London. This appears to be part of a larger operation." James felt his world shift as the implications became clear. What had started as protecting one lost little girl had apparently uncovered something far more significant. These weren't just child abductors. They were part of a coordinated attack on London itself. Emma's near abduction had been either part of a larger plan or had accidentally exposed something that was supposed to remain hidden. The first man reached for his phone with his free hand. keeping his other hand positioned near his concealed weapon. "I'm going to make one call," he announced, "and then you're all going to step aside and let us leave. Because what's about to happen in this city is going to make one little girl seem very unimportant." James exchanged glances with his fellow guards. Protocol in situations involving potential terrorism was clear, but it also required them to balance immediate threats against larger security concerns. If these men were part of a coordinated attack, detaining them might save lives, but it might also trigger whatever larger plan they were part of. The criminal made his phone call, speaking in what sounded like coded language. "The bird has flown," he said into the device. "Initiate contingency protocols." The words meant nothing to James, but the man's satisfaction after speaking them was unmistakable. Something had been set in motion, and James feared they were about to discover what Emma had unknowingly prevented or uncovered. Davies received another urgent communication through his radio. "Command reports unusual activity near several key locations across London," he relayed quietly. "They're requesting immediate interrogation of these suspects and full examination of their vehicle." The larger criminal laughed at this news. "Too late for interrogations," he said confidently. "By the time you figure out what's really happening, the real operation will already be underway. You stopped nothing. You just changed the timing slightly." James felt a growing sense of dread as he realized the full scope of what they were facing. Emma's innocent mistake of getting separated from her school group had accidentally exposed what appeared to be a major criminal or terrorist operation. The child's near abduction wasn't the main event. It was just one small piece of something much larger and more dangerous. The question now was whether they could extract enough information from these criminals to prevent whatever else was planned, or if stopping Emma's abduction had simply alerted the perpetrators to change their timeline. Either way, James knew that his decision to trust his instincts and protect one little girl had potentially saved many more lives, even if they didn't yet understand the full scope of the threat they had uncovered. The standoff continued as more security personnel arrived at the scene. James watched as specialist units surrounded the area, their presence confirming that this situation had escalated far beyond a simple child abduction attempt. Anti-terrorism, officers, bomb disposal experts, and intelligence operatives were now part of what had started as one guard's instinct to protect a lost little girl. Commander Harrison, head of Palace Security, arrived and immediately took control of the situation. His face was grim as he approached James. "Sergeant Mitchell, I need you to tell me exactly what you observed before these suspects appeared," he said urgently. "Every detail could be crucial to understanding what we're dealing with." James quickly recounted the events, from first noticing Emma separated from her school group to the suspicious behavior of the van and its occupants. As he spoke, he could see the commander's expression growing more serious. The intelligence operatives were taking notes, and James realized his observations were being treated as critical evidence in what was clearly a major security investigation. Meanwhile, forensics experts had begun examining the van, and what they found confirmed James's worst fears. Beyond the restraints and personal items he had glimpsed earlier, the vehicle contained detailed maps of London with specific locations marked, communication equipment, and what appeared to be plans for coordinated activities across multiple sites. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead forensics investigator, approached Commander Harrison with her preliminary findings. "Sir, this vehicle is essentially a mobile command center," she reported. "We've found evidence suggesting this was part of a larger network planning simultaneous operations across London. The child abduction appears to have been either a diversionary tactic or a way to gather intelligence about security responses." The two criminals remained defiant despite being surrounded by overwhelming force. The first man, whom intelligence had now identified as Marcus Webb, had an extensive criminal record including connections to international trafficking rings. His partner, identified as Viktor Kozlov, had ties to organized crime groups operating across Europe. "You still don't understand what you've interrupted," Webb said to Commander Harrison. "That little girl wasn't random. Her father works for the intelligence services, and taking her was supposed to provide us with leverage for the main operation. Without that leverage, our associates have had to modify their plans. James felt his blood run cold at this revelation. Emma hadn't been a random target after all. She had been specifically chosen because of her father's work, which meant the criminals had been conducting surveillance and planning for weeks or possibly months. The sophisticated nature of their operation was becoming clearer by the minute. Commander Harrison's radio crackled with urgent updates from across London. "Sir, we're receiving reports of suspicious activity near Parliament, the London Eye, and several transport hubs," came the voice from Command Center. "It appears multiple cells have been activated simultaneously." The realization hit everyone at once. Emma's attempted abduction had been the signal for a coordinated attack across London. By preventing it, James hadn't just saved one child. He had potentially disrupted a major terrorist operation. However, the criminals' confidence suggested they had backup plans ready to implement. Intelligence Officer Rebecca Thompson joined the group, her laptop displaying real-time information from security cameras across the city. "We're tracking increased activity at 17 different locations," she reported. "Whatever they had planned, it's happening now, but without the coordination they expected." Webb smiled coldly at this information. "You think you won by saving one little girl? All you did was accelerate our timeline. The primary objectives will still be achieved, just with different methods, and now you know there's nothing you can do to stop it because you don't know where or when." James watched as the intelligence team worked frantically to decode the information found in the van and connect it to the suspicious activities being reported across London. The maps, communication logs, and planning documents were being analyzed by experts who were trying to predict the next moves of what appeared to be a sophisticated criminal network. The situation took another serious turn when Emma's father arrived. At the scene, Dr. Michael Collins worked for MI6, Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service, and his face was pale with the realization of how close his daughter had come to being used as leverage against national security interests. "Thank you," Dr. Collins said to James, his voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't trusted your instincts, I don't want to think about what could have happened to Emma or what I might have been forced to do to get her back." The gratitude was genuine, but James could see the fear in the man's eyes as he understood how his work had put his family at risk. Commander Harrison gathered the key personnel for a brief strategy session. "Based on what we've learned, we're dealing with a network that had detailed intelligence about our personnel and their families," he explained. "They've been planning this operation for months, using sophisticated surveillance and planning techniques that suggest state-level resources or extensive criminal organization backing." The forensics team had made another disturbing discovery. Hidden compartments in the van contained fake identification documents, official-looking credentials, and even replica government uniforms. These criminals hadn't just been planning to abduct Emma, they had been prepared to impersonate officials if necessary, which suggested their operation involved infiltrating secure locations or deceiving other targets. James realized that his simple decision to investigate a suspicious situation had uncovered what might be one of the most sophisticated criminal operations London had seen in years. The coordination between multiple cells, the detailed intelligence gathering, and the backup plans all pointed to an organization with significant resources and planning capabilities. As security teams across London responded to the various threats that had been activated, it became clear that James's intervention had forced the criminals to abandon their preferred strategy and resort to less coordinated backup plans. While this made their activities more desperate and potentially more dangerous in some ways, it also made them more predictable and easier to track. Officer Thompson looked up from her laptop with urgent news. "We've intercepted communications, suggesting the primary target was never about causing casualties," she announced. "This appears to be an elaborate heist operation targeting multiple high-value locations simultaneously. The terrorism angle was misdirection to draw security resources away from their real objectives." The revelation changed everyone's understanding of the situation. These weren't terrorists planning mass casualties. They were sophisticated criminals, planning coordinated thefts from some of London's most secure locations. Emma's abduction would have provided them with leverage over her father's intelligence access, potentially allowing them to bypass security measures at their target locations. James looked at the two criminals, who were no longer smiling. Their carefully planned operation months or years in the making, had been derailed by one royal guard's instinct to protect a lost little girl. Whatever they had hoped to steal, whatever leverage they had planned to use, and whatever coordination they had counted on, had all been disrupted by a single moment of human decency and professional vigilance. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The most sophisticated criminal operation London had seen in years had been stopped not by advanced technology or intelligence gathering, but by a soldier's basic instinct to protect an innocent child. Sometimes the simplest human responses were the most powerful weapons against even the most complex threats. Over the next several hours, the full scope of the criminal operation began to emerge as intelligence teams worked around the clock to decode the evidence found in the van and trace the network's activities. James remained at the scene, providing detailed statements and helping investigators understand exactly what he had observed that had triggered his suspicions. The breakthrough came when Officer Thompson successfully decrypted the communication logs found in the criminals' equipment. The messages revealed a sophisticated network spanning multiple countries, with London serving as the target for their most ambitious operation yet. The group had been planning to simultaneously rob the Bank of England's gold reserves, steal priceless artifacts from the British Museum, and access classified intelligence from government facilities. "The scope is incredible," Dr. Chen explained to the assembled security team. They had inside information about security rotations, building layouts, and even personal schedules of key personnel. Emma's father's position at MI6 would have given them access to override codes and security protocols that would have made their break-ins nearly undetectable. Commander Harrison coordinated with authorities across London as the remaining cells of the criminal network were systematically tracked down and apprehended. The criminals' backup plans, hastily implemented after Emma's failed abduction disrupted their timeline, had made them vulnerable to detection and capture. James learned that Webb and Kozlov were just two members of an international crime syndicate known as the Shadow Network, which specialized in high-stakes heists targeting government and cultural institutions. They had spent 2 years planning the London operation, gathering intelligence and positioning assets throughout the city. The van itself revealed even more disturbing evidence. Beyond the planning materials and equipment, investigators found detailed surveillance photos of dozens of families, including Emma's. The criminals had been tracking the daily routines of intelligence officers, government officials, and security personnel, looking for vulnerabilities they could exploit. "Your daughter wasn't their first choice," Commander Harrison explained to Dr. Collins. "The photos show they had been watching several families, waiting for the right opportunity. Emma getting separated from her school group presented them with what they thought was the perfect chance." As the day progressed, news of the foiled operation began to spread through intelligence circles, though the public remained largely unaware of how close London had come to a major security breach. The coordination required to simultaneously target multiple high-security locations would have been unprecedented, and the potential losses, both financial and in terms of national security, could have been catastrophic. James found himself at the center of recognition from the highest levels of government. The Prime Minister's office issued a commendation for his actions, though the specific details remained classified. The royal family's private secretary also conveyed their personal gratitude for protecting both the palace and the broader security of the realm. However, James remained focused on the human element of the story. Emma Collins, who had been safely reunited with her family, had unknowingly played a crucial role in preventing one of the most sophisticated criminal operations in British history. Her innocent trust in a stranger offering candy had nearly made her a pawn in a game much larger than anyone could have imagined. Dr. Collins requested a private meeting with James to express his gratitude more personally. "My work requires me to think about national security threats on a global scale," he said. "But I never imagined that my family could become a target, or that my daughter's safety could be connected to such a massive criminal operation." The investigation revealed that the Shadow Network had been responsible for similar operations in other countries, using kidnapped family members to coerce cooperation from government officials and security personnel. The London operation was to be their most ambitious yet, with potential profits in the hundreds of millions of pounds. James learned that his intervention had not only saved Emma, but had also prevented the compromise of intelligence operations across multiple countries. The access codes and security protocols that Dr. Collins would have been forced to provide under duress could have exposed ongoing operations and endangered agents worldwide. As the immediate crisis passed, James returned to his regular duties at Buckingham Palace, but the experience had changed him profoundly. He now understood that his role as a royal guard extended far beyond ceremonial functions or protecting the immediate royal family. He was part of a larger network of security professionals working to protect the nation's interests. The other, guards who had responded to Emma's call for help, were also recognized for their quick response and professional handling of the situation. Sergeant Davies, in particular, was commended for his coordination with intelligence services and his role in managing the complex, multi-agency response. Officer Thompson's technical expertise in decrypting the criminals' communications proved crucial in tracking down the remaining network members. Her work led to arrests in 6 different countries and the recovery of millions of pounds worth of stolen artifacts and currency from previous operations. The forensics analysis conducted by Dr. Chen provided investigators with a comprehensive understanding of the Shadow Network's methods and capabilities. This intelligence was shared with law enforcement agencies worldwide to help prevent similar operations in other countries. Emma's school, initially unaware of the full scope of what their student had encountered, implemented new safety protocols for field trips and group activities. The incident served as a reminder that even routine educational outings required careful attention to student safety and supervision. The van that had contained so much incriminating evidence was eventually transferred to a secure facility for further analysis. Intelligence services continued to study the equipment and materials found inside, using them to better understand criminal methodologies and improve security measures. As news of the successful operation spread through intelligence communities, James received recognition from international security agencies who had been tracking the Shadow Network for years. His simple act of protecting a lost child had provided the breakthrough they needed to dismantle a criminal organization that had eluded capture across multiple continents. The ripple effects of James's decision continued to unfold over the following weeks and months. The intelligence gathered from the London operation led to additional arrests, the recovery of stolen items, and the prevention of planned crimes in other countries. What had started as one guard's instinct to protect a frightened little girl had become a major victory in international law enforcement cooperation. James often thought about the moment when he first noticed Emma standing alone in the crowd, and how easily he could have dismissed his suspicions about the van and its occupants. The training and instincts that made him an effective royal guard had served him well, but it was his basic human compassion that had ultimately made the difference in recognizing and responding to the threat. 6 months after the incident, James Mitchell stood once again at his post outside Buckingham Palace, but everything had changed. The quiet confidence he had always carried now came with a deeper understanding of the responsibility that came with his position. The red uniform and ceremonial rifle were the same, but the man wearing them had been transformed by the experience of uncovering one of the most sophisticated criminal operations in British history. The media had eventually caught wind of the story, though the full details remained classified for national security reasons. Headlines spoke of a heroic royal guard who had prevented a major crime, but James knew the real story was much more complex. He had simply done what felt right in the moment, trusting his instincts to protect a vulnerable child. Emma Collins had become something of a local celebrity at her school, though she was still too young to fully understand what had happened that day. Her father, Dr. Collins, had been reassigned to a different position within MI6 for security reasons, and the family had relocated to a safer location. Before they moved, Emma had insisted on visiting James one more time to thank him properly. "You're my hero," the little girl had said during their final meeting, her bright eyes filled with the same innocence that had nearly made her a victim. She had drawn him a picture of a guard in a red uniform standing next to a little girl, with the words, "Thank you," written in colorful crayon letters. James kept that drawing in his locker, a reminder of why his work truly mattered. The Shadow Network had been completely dismantled through the coordinated efforts of law enforcement agencies across multiple countries. Webb and Kozlov were sentenced to life imprisonment, and their testimony had led to the capture of dozens of other network members. The organization that had operated for nearly a decade, stealing millions in valuables and compromising government security, was finally brought to justice. James had been promoted to senior sergeant and had been selected to train new recruits in threat assessment and civilian protection protocols. His experience had become a case study in security training programs, teaching others how to recognize subtle signs of criminal activity and trust their instincts even in seemingly routine situations. The investigation had revealed that the Shadow Network's London operation would have been their final heist before disappearing with enough stolen wealth to fund their activities for decades. The simultaneous theft of gold reserves, priceless artifacts, and classified intelligence would have dealt a devastating blow to British security and cultural heritage. One guard's decision to protect one lost child had prevented losses that could never have been fully calculated. Dr. Chen's forensic analysis had become the foundation for new security protocols at museums, banks, and government facilities worldwide. The criminals' methods were so sophisticated that they had exposed vulnerabilities that security experts had never considered. Her work had led to improvements in protection systems that would benefit institutions globally. Officer Thompson had been recruited by an international task force dedicated to combating organized crime networks. Her success in decrypting the Shadow Network's communications had established her as one of the leading experts in criminal cyber intelligence. She often credited James's initial intervention as the key that unlocked the entire operation. Commander. Harrison had implemented new training protocols for all palace security personnel, based on the lessons learned from the incident. Guards were now specifically trained to recognize not just direct threats to the royal family, but also situations that might indicate larger criminal operations affecting national security. The palace had quietly instituted new safety measures for public events, though visitors remained unaware of the enhanced security protocols. James's experience had demonstrated that threats could emerge from unexpected situations, and the security apparatus had adapted accordingly to provide better protection while maintaining the open, welcoming atmosphere that made the palace accessible to the public. James's family in Yorkshire had learned about his heroic actions through news reports, and his father, the retired police officer, had expressed pride in his son's instincts and courage. "You did exactly what your grandfather would have done," his father had said during a phone call. "Protected the innocent and served the greater good, no matter what the personal cost might have been." The ripple effects of that single moment of decision continued to spread in ways James never could have imagined. Children in schools across Britain were now taught about stranger danger and the importance of staying with their groups during field trips. Emma's near abduction had become an educational tool to help protect other children from similar threats. International security conferences now featured presentations about the Shadow Network case, using it as an example of how individual vigilance could uncover major criminal operations. James had been invited to speak at several of these conferences, though he always emphasized that he had simply done his job and followed his training. The investigation had also led to improved cooperation between different law enforcement agencies, breaking down barriers that had previously hindered information sharing. The success in dismantling the Shadow Network had demonstrated the power of coordinated international effort in combating sophisticated criminal organizations. As James stood at his post on this particular morning, watching tourists gather outside the palace gates, he found himself naturally more alert to unusual behavior. His eyes automatically scanned the crowd, looking for anything that seemed out of place. The experience with Emma had sharpened his already keen observational skills and deepened his understanding of how quickly innocent situations could become dangerous. A school group approached the palace gates, children in matching uniforms excitedly pointing at the guards and taking photos. James smiled slightly as he watched their teacher carefully count heads, ensuring all students remained together. The enhanced safety protocols that had emerged from Emma's experience were now protecting children across the country. Among the tourists, James noticed a small commotion near the corner where Emma had first become separated from her group. An elderly man appeared to have dropped his walking stick and was struggling to retrieve it. Without hesitation, James signaled to his colleague and stepped forward to assist, his actions guided by the same instinct to help that had saved Emma and exposed an international criminal network. The elderly man thanked James gratefully and, as the guard returned to his position, he reflected on how that single decision 6 months ago continued to influence his actions every day. He had learned that being a royal guard meant more than standing ceremonially at attention. It meant being constantly ready to protect and serve, whether the threat came from international criminals or simply from life's everyday challenges. The morning sun cast the same long shadows across the cobblestones. Tourists continued their eager photographing, and James Mitchell stood proudly in his red uniform. But now he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of human decency could have the largest consequences, and that trusting one's instincts to protect the vulnerable was always the right choice, no matter how complex the situation might become.